workshop on biodiversity and local farming. I'm your moderator, Terry Shistar, and Runt Reichert is assisting me. We have two panelists, Joanne Baumgartner, the Executive Director of Wild Farm Alliance, Rockamann, Founding Director of Earth Dance Organic Farm School. Both spoke earlier today. After some administrative details, I'll give an introduction, then they'll talk a bit, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. Please enter your questions into the chat. Hi, Jay. Okay, administrative stuff. If you're not speaking, please keep your microphones muted. Please ask questions through the questions tab or the chat tab of the live discussion box. This workshop will be recorded and available for viewing by attendees throughout the year. If you don't wish to be on camera, please turn your camera off. Okay, so be patient if there's bandwidth problems. If your computer's giving you too many issues, you can download the Swap Card app to your phone, and you can use the Help Center screen to chat questions if you have any technical difficulties. Okay, our speakers represent two aspects of Beyond Pesticides vision encompassed by the work. Our organization began as a result of assaults on certain groups of humans, farm workers, and the global assault on biodiversity. Beyond Pesticides was born partly out of stories firsthand of chemical exposures, the sickness, the miscarriages, the human flaggers in the fields, the lack of sanitation facilities, and the pesticide drift from field to field, the lack of protective equipment experienced by farm workers, but also from the wisdom of Rachel Carson, who described in Silent Spring, the most alarming of all man's assaults on the environment is the contamination of air, earth, rivers, and sea with dangerous and even lethal materials. As Jay has said of our history, what better way to channel this out an advocacy organization that could bring together the best minds that we can gather to address the latest science, discuss policies that move our communities towards green and sustainable practices, information on how we affect transformation of our approaches to land and building management that ensure the survivability of the planet. This part of the forum is addressing solutions. We'll hear from Joanne Baumgartner at Wild Farm Alliance, as an organization that works to bring greater biodiversity to farms, protecting habitat for creatures, farmers by pollinating crops, eating so-called pests, and building soil. We'll also hear from Molly Rockamann of Earth Dance Organic Farm School, known as a leader in the journey towards justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. They asked me to begin by explaining how we see their major concerns to be connected. So we can start with Molly's introduction to her plenary talk, where she explained that Earth Dance occupies land stolen from the Missouri. The land where I am today was stolen from the Kaw or Kansa people. Joanne lived stolen from the Ohlone. These original inhabitants considered themselves part of the land and lived that way for thousands of years without destroying it. The way of life that worked for the Ohlone was not the same as what worked for the Kaw or the Missouri, but all three tribes had a sustainable way of life and respected non-human inhabitants of the land. In the relatively short period of agriculture was introduced, people in the land have been poisoned and the land has been made less productive. Although California enjoys a milder climate than Kansas or Missouri, the agriculture is pretty much the same across the country. Biodiversity has been devastated. A typical modern farm has little more biodiversity than a parking lot. In a very important way, the diversity of people is related to the biodiversity of place. Joanne works to restore biodiversity, but that work requires diversity of the humans living and working on the land, understanding the unique needs of a place, and becoming part of the place. Explore the ways that we can bring greater diversity to the land. Okay, Joanne will start.
Thank you, Terry. I'm Joanne Baumgartner with the Wild Farm Alliance, and I'm talking to you from Watsonville, California. We are bringing nature back to the farm. And I am going to share my slides with you. Let's see. Okay. So today's talk's about biodiversity and local farming. And it's important to consider that 60% of the continental US is in agriculture, and agriculture is causing a lot of the biodiversity crisis. But on the positive side, it has the ability to help turn things around, to support more biodiversity and to support more healthy production of food. So I used to think, and I think a lot of people still do, that organic, just organic is the best. And I used to be an organic farmer for years. And so there's this study over here on the left where I outline how organic versus conventional shows that organic has more plants and wildlife, better pollination services, better soil health, better soil carbon storage, and energy use efficiency. But if you look at other studies that look at diversified farms versus monoculture farms, you see the same thing happening. And really, this is pointing out that we need to go in this direction of, yes, organic, but also diversified. And that's what this workshop is about. So one of our tools we've created, you can download this at wildfarmalliance.org, is this publication, How to Conserve Biodiversity on the Farm, Actions to Take on a Continuum from Simple to Complex. So it's starting at the left, and most farmers that are trying to be sustainable or regenerative are starting with soil and building soil life, but they need to keep the soil covered, add water nest features to increase biodiversity. Once flowers are added, that increases it exponentially. Having native plants increases it again, and making those plants be trees and shrubs, some of them be trees and shrubs, and then knitting them to all of these habitats together in corridors can really increase the biodiversity. And there's so many benefits to the farm when that occurs. So soil life happens with cover crops, and the increase of soil life happens with cover crops and compost as examples. But we also want to support the soil life like ground nesting bees, and that requires non-tilled areas that are well drained. We want to keep the soil covered, which will stop erosion, and it also can support beetles like this beetle bank on the right. It also can support like these prairie strips, keeping the ground covered with prairie strips in between corn and soybeans in the Midwest will support a lot more pollinators and a lot more bird diversity. And as you're going to hear more about birds, well, right now, but just in general, there are a lot of beneficial birds. And we've been working in that topic for quite some time. So you can attract and support beneficial birds by allowing them to nest under the eaves and or providing nest boxes and perches and providing water for them. And these water obviously helps all kinds of biodiversity. Flowering plants will support beneficial insects and pollinators and parasitoids, not just predatory insects. So once we include native plants in the mix, we really start seeing a lot more biodiversity. For instance, this beneficial tachinid fly on the left will eat cabbage, or will lay its eggs on cabbage loopers, which is a pest, and those eggs hatch and eat the caterpillar. And grow up and become more tachinid flies. But when the cabbage isn't there, the cabbage looper isn't there, and what is the tachinid fly going to eat? Well, if we have oak trees that support the oak moth, like on the right, then the tachinid fly has an alternate food source when needed, and will be there on the farm when you do plant cabbage or other crops like that. Because tachinid flies are a generalist. They will attack and lay their eggs on all kinds of caterpillars. This is another parasitoid that has laid its eggs on a native caterpillar, which is on a native ash tree, and or this caterpillar, sphinx caterpillar, will lay its eggs on snowberries and be similarly an alternative host when the crop pest isn't around. But more than that, native plants are important for birds because they support so many lepidopteran species. That means caterpillars, like oak trees, will support 500 different caterpillars in the Northeast. And that matters for baby birds. This shows 16 out of 20 baby bird families eat a lot of caterpillars. That's the green bars in these charts. And without them, sometimes birds cannot have successful families being raised. We also know that hedgerows are important, and hedgerows will support a lot more beneficial insects than if we just have a weedy border instead of planting hedgerow, preferably native hedgerow. When we have, you can look at a landscape and think like, oh, there's trees that structure, that's good, and that's true. But it's also not good if those plants are from other areas and they're not supporting the insects like the caterpillars that birds eat and others are relying on. So structure and composition is important. This parasitoid and others were found to be a lot more present when there was riparian and other natural vegetation present within 500 feet of the crop. This ichneummonid wasp was its parasitism rates on diamondback moth was higher when closer to forest cover and forest perimeter. These scrub jays and robins and some other birds that are around when hedgerows are present near kale crops help to reduce pest insects near the hedgerows. There's lots of birds that help glean insects, like the inset of the picture on the right. This codley moth can be eaten by birds like the chickadee when looking for them on the barks of trees. We also want structure like snags. Leave those dead trees because they'll support mason bees that will pollinate our crops, and they'll also support bats, and their bats are in decline right now. So it's super important habitat. Riparian areas and hedgerows, which are woody vegetation, in this one study stored 18% of the farm's total carbon, despite only taking up 6% of the land area. Hedgerows, if you look at this chart on the left, you can see a blue line and a brown line, and the blue line is with a hedgerow and the brown line is without. And so what you're seeing is that with the blue line, you're getting a lot more pollination, pest control services, more birds and bees, and bee persistence, and less pesticide costs. Whereas the brown, you're getting all less of that except for more pesticide cost. And then corridors, lastly, knitting these habitats together are important. There's all kinds of corridors, from hedgerows and windbreaks to riparian areas and big natural areas that can help be connections for wildlife. There's connections through the farm, and then there's big connections like monarch migration or the different flyways in the US that birds use. US and North America. And when we don't have these corridors, like when we don't allow coyotes to move through the landscape, what happens at times is the mesopredators like raccoons can increase, and they're really good at eating birds' eggs, and then the birds decrease. So it's important to have that corridor there. Native plants are and native ecosystems are super important. We're working right now with the organic community to ensure that native ecosystems are not transformed overnight into organic fields, like an organic cornfield. And currently that can happen. So stay tuned. If you go to our website, wildfarmalliance.org, and join our mailing list to find out more about that. We have published this booklet, Supporting Beneficial Birds and Managing Pest Birds, which you can download too. And it talks about how there's 120 studies looking at how if birds are helpful for pest control, and 90% of them have found yes, they are. We have a story platform where you can learn more about that, benefits of birds on the farm. We have pest control, avian pest control videos with farmers and researchers. And you can design a farm to make the most of birds foraging strategies by attracting and supporting these different kinds of birds. So that's my contact information. I do want to say that we work with all kinds of farmers, making sure that we have social diversity in our programs. Thank you. And so I'm going to hand it off to you, Molly. Can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Muted.
I'm not used to not being able to see who's in the room, the participants, this structure. So it's great if anybody wants to drop anything in the chat just to let us know that people are out there listening and watching. I really love it when these presentations are as interactive as possible. So using the tools we have, it'd be awesome if anybody wants to just let us know where you're from, maybe if you're a farmer or how you come to this work. Feel free to use the live chat. And I will actually go ahead and also share a screen. So let me go into that right now. Share the screen. Okay. So hopefully you might see this whole thing. I'm going to go into presenter view. So just a little, can you all see this? Okay, looks like yes. Just a little background on the work that I do. I am located, Earth Farm is located in Ferguson, Missouri, which is a suburb, more or less, of St. Louis, Missouri. We are an organization that I started in 2008. So we've been around about 13 years. And we call the work that we do growing food, farmers, and community. This gives you a little snapshot of where we're located. So you can see that little blue box around the 233 right there in the center of this image. This is taken from the county real estate office to show, how much development we are surrounded by. And so we comprise the little blue box 233, 231, and 233. Again, if you can see those, I wish I had I don't know if you can see where my mouse is, but this section right here, it's about 14 acres, and it's a real treasure. It's considered to be the oldest organic farm west of the Mississippi. And really the reason I started the organization was because of how amazing this land is. It's has a really rich history of providing organic produce for the community. The farmers that came right before us, Al and Caroline, farmed their entire married lives. And at one point they rented out, when Al was no longer in good health, they did rent it out in 1995 to Andrew and Abigail, these two young farmers who ran a CSA on the operation, on the farm, CSA operation on it back in 95. But for the most part, it was rented out by the acre to some hobby farmers. When I was reintroduced to the farm as a young person, and found out that there was great opportunity there on this land to connect more people to it. So our mission statement as an organization is to grow food, farmers, and community through hands-on education and delicious experiences. Our vision is that organic farmers are feeding their own communities, communities are caring for the land, and that farms can be a place to inspire creativity. So this is kind of a menu of our offerings. We offer programming for adults and youth. It is not just for kids. We have a lot of our longest running programming actually is adult education. Sometimes it's been in the form of like a 6-month apprenticeship. This year we actually have a 5-week quick start program for beginning organic gardeners, which is actually available now online. So people all around the country can participate in it. And then we also have a 10-week full-time apprenticeship opportunity in the summer. We also have lots of volunteer opportunities, tours, classes, and of course we distribute our produce locally. So just to give an overview of our programming, the apprenticeship again has changed from what it's been in the years past. This year we actually are in day 2 of our summer apprenticeship. I just came from a meet and greet with a bunch of our dedicated volunteers and our newest apprentices. There's 4 of them, all women, I might add. It's really amazing to see how many, how over the years it's always skewed very female as far as the participants in this. So I do think that that's interesting and worthy of noting, that I feel like we're changing the trajectory of agriculture. When people often think of farmers, they definitely don't usually think of young women, but that is who we are seeing participate in these farmer training programs. So this is a place where people really connect with each other. This is a group of 3 apprentices from a few years ago who did the 6-month apprenticeship program and are all doing amazing things in St. Louis. Actually, one of them is now living in Florida. This is our, I don't know if he was an apprentice or assistant farm manager the year that this photo was taken, but this is Nate Wolf. He and his wife have since bought a farm in Eureka, Missouri that they are planting out food forests and looking to raise small livestock on. So we've really found that a lot of people get their start in agriculture at Earth Dance, and it really helps people feel like they have the skills and really the network to make their farming dreams a reality. A lot of, people come to our program not having grown up on farms or not having connection to the land in a very physical way. A lot of the folks who do our program are from the city or from the suburbs. And so we really make farming more accessible to a lot of people. So this is a snapshot of what the farm looks like. Actually, this is a few years ago. So these fruit trees that you might be able to see are even larger now. Our fruit orchard is spread across the landscape. So to kind of go to speak to what Joanne and the Wild Farm Alliance are all about, there's a lot of intentional integration of planting. So we're not just doing a full acre of one crop at a time, of course, partly due to the fact of our scale, but we also are the same way about interplanting when it comes to varieties of fruit trees and having intentional pollinator attracting ground covers and shrubs in between the fruit trees, and not having to mow grass between the fruit trees, just actually focused on stabilizing the soil in those perennial berms, we call them. And you can see our very large hedgerow. We're very fortunate to be surrounded by woods on 3 sides of the property. So we welcome lots and lots of school groups out. I should give a shout out to this young farmer, Katie Adams, actually returned to Central Illinois, which is where she's from, a few years ago. And she and her husband are farming together and doing awesome work with the Savannah Institute. So it's been really exciting to see her get her start in farming at Earth Dance and inspire so many young people. She really led countless school field trips while at Earth Dance and is doing really exciting things now, scaling up polycultural farms. And this gentleman on the right is James Young. He's actually a graduate of the apprenticeship program. He was our junior farm crew leader for a few years. He's also a local school district teacher. The gentleman on the left was actually a junior farm crew member for one summer. And so this is, offering a paid opportunity for young people in our community to, many of them earn their very first paycheck ever working on an urban organic farm. And then, of course, more field trips. We try to have the field trips incorporate hands-on activities whenever possible. This looks like this was a planting happening in the 7 Generations garden. We've on occasion done school visits as a way to go to students who couldn't otherwise, maybe their schools don't have the funding for field trips and transportation. So especially with the local school district, we've done lots of field trips. This crew is an amazing group of people from the Strength and Honor Mentoring and Tutoring Program, a summer camp that we partner with each summer to offer farm-based fun and education for local neighbors of the farm. And we were able to bring together a lot of seniors who were interested in teaching healthy eating habits together with the young people to offer like healthy cooking opportunities and games on the farm. And then, we have lots of volunteer opportunities with service learning. We're also out in the community in a variety of ways. This is actually a Metro bus in St. Louis that we had a paint by number mural created on, and then we had a bus painting event at the 4th of July festival a few summers ago. And it became a beautiful mural that showed health begins in the soil. And just some more shots of groups having a good time together on the farm. A few years ago, we also conducted a community food assessment to really understand what people in the community are asking for when it comes to better food options. And so our junior farm crew members were very involved in that process and helped identify, the different aspects of the food system and how they interact with that in their day-to-day lives. And this is at the St. Louis Earth Day Festival. We have organic farm school classes usually. Obviously, this didn't happen last year during COVID, but we're looking forward to getting back to having events out in the community to be a part of. And this was our first year of spring training, the 5-week program that I mentioned, the Quick Start program, as a way of working to address the inequities in the food system. Earth Dance is located in a predominantly low-income African-American neighborhood that has experienced a lot of food apartheid, and as well as other surrounding municipalities. And so we want to empower as many people in our own community as possible to grow their own food and have the skills to do so. So in order to completely remove the barrier of cost, we actually made that program completely free for residents of the farms surrounding municipalities, and then charged a nominal fee to general public participants. And so back to on-farm events, we're looking forward to hosting people on the farm again. We're actually having a big Juneteenth celebration coming up on Saturday, June 19th, as well as also having a farm dinner soon. And more photos of farm tours. These are just ways you can find out more information. We sell at the Ferguson Farmers Market, as well as our opening a Pay What You Can farm stand. So just some images that show what is happening on the farm. And I'm going to stop sharing now. And thank you. I'll hand it back over to you, Terry.
Okay, I'm not seeing questions, so I'll have to make some up. Molly, your website talks about how Earth Dance tries to follow permaculture principles, and I wondered if you could tell us how that, what that means for the values of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how they contribute to sustainability. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely, thank you. I think that when I was fortunate to learn about permaculture principles, it was very clear that they don't only apply to land design and to agriculture, but they just as much apply to social systems, and these lessons that we can take from nature and from people who have lived on the land, you know, millennia before us, that there's these guiding principles that, you know, again, don't only apply to the way we plant things, but also apply to the way that we can structure programs and communities and even meetings. So an example is one of the permaculture principles is integrate rather than segregate. So we do that with our crops, with interplanting. We do a lot of companion planting, and we mix up, you know, which fruit trees are in which order so that we're minimizing pest pressure and disease pressure. And we also do that with regards to our program participants. So we have people from very different walks of life participating in the same program. And we also have intentionally layered some of our youth programming with our adult programming, so there can be that intergenerational learning. And then another principle that I feel like helps guide us is to value and honor the margins. So I think that kind of is spoken to with, you know, also what Wild Farm Alliance does in terms of even thinking about hedgerows and the margins of our farms, just thinking about the value that people who are often kind of put on the marginal sides of society, the value that they really do hold in actually having some of the best solutions for rethinking our food system. And I think a lot of times people tend to put low income, in particular, people into a category of like just focusing on the disadvantages that group might have. But they also bring, you know, more so I would say than focusing on the disadvantages is focusing on the assets, you know, like what can we learn? When I say we, I mean, like, I'm a privileged white person. What can I learn from, you know, a low income Black neighbor of the farm, and what do they have to share about their family's food history, you know, that I can learn from and I can value? Because I think that's some of the unlearning that we need to do to shift away from such a white dominant culture that I think has created harm across, you know, across spheres, not just the social sphere, but also the environmental sphere. How can we unlearn some of the systems we've been working in, or how do we unlearn things so that we can change some of the systems we've just like taken for granted that this is the way things should go?
Terry, there's a question in the chat.
Is there?
Yes.
Any questions?
So it says, what strategies do the panelists envision to promote the transition from monoculture factory farms, which are chemical intensive, as well as monoculture to a sustainable model? Joanne, I don't know if you want to take that one.
Good question. I'm not seeing it in the chat, but who wants to tackle that first?
Yeah, well, I can start. We have a big vision. We want to see 1 million bird boxes on farms from Baja to BC. We want to see hedgerows to the moon and back, which is the equivalent of 500,000 acres that used to of hedgerows that used to be on the little area of the United Kingdom before industrial ag started taking out all those hedgerows. So, and so what does that mean for hedgerows? It means circling a 10-acre farm with hedgerows or riparian areas. So how do we get there? How do we get from the monoculture to that? Well, we need to break up those big monocultures and put hedgerows around them for all the reasons you heard me talk about and Molly talk about. And then, well, what are the tools that we use to get there? We have field days like Molly does, and we really try to work with and do work with farm leaders who are doing really innovative work and ask them to partner with us, either with field days, or we're also creating videos where we interview them and we interview researchers that are documenting this kinds of practices that these farmers are using. Those videos are all around avian pest control. So we're really trying to inspire farmers by them understanding the research, but also really understanding what their neighbors are doing, because they really care about, well, that's great if it's research and it's somebody who's really bookish, but does it work on the ground? And so we really try and do that. And then we're also have train the trainer program where we are helping to educate those people who are going out in the agriculture community and be able to take this message that we really do benefit from biodiversity. And so, yeah, and I think that's a huge question that's asked, because we should have done this. We've been working at this for the last 40 years, or I have, and it still hasn't happened. I mean, we're getting more and more people interested, but there's a huge, as you all know, a huge problem with pesticide companies dominating so much of our ag industry. And I think there are some ways that we can work. We need to rethink how we help farmers understand ecological pest control and really get control of that message and wrestle it away from the pesticides companies, so that farmers are buying ecological knowledge, not pesticides. So there you go. That's my take on it.
That's great. Molly, did you want to say something about?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of one of the strategies that I think would really help make a transition is, one of the reasons that it seems like agriculture has gone this direction of being like so driven by corporate profit is that it has become really challenging for a lot more people to make a living on the land. Our food system is so corrupted and by pure focus on profit. And I think part of to bring up some of the Jedi principles and Jedi work of just like the unlearning of being so set on the end goal of just making money. One of the ways to do that is to look at like I like how you mentioned, Terry, thinking about the non-human habitants of the land and thinking about like the overall value equation that farms can offer besides just the bottom dollar. I think I personally think that we're in a historic moment of needing to really rethink the allocation of resources. And one of the greatest resources when we're talking about agriculture, of course, is land and land access. And so we may need to be thinking about how to do land reparations, you know, so that there's so many people who actually want to make a living on the land and would love to convert large scale monocultural commodity crop farms. You know, there's also so many farming families who are looking at their next in line, their next generation, and not seeing people who actually want to stay on the farm. So there's going to be there already is happening a major transfer of land ownership happening in this country. And I think we have to be very careful and intentional about how that happens so that people who have been kept out of resources, in particular access to land, and who have, you know, had land stolen from them, that they can actually have that resource. Because we all know that it takes a lot more than just the land itself to actually make a living farming. I mean, even if you're gifted a plot of land, it's going to take a whole lot of capital to actually make a viable business from. So if we can at least lower the cost of entry for people who are wanting to become farmers, there's a lot more there, obviously, but I think that, again, I just want to always remind ourselves that we can't just be thinking about the ecological aspects of farming when it comes to this transition away, like thinking of the monoculture that's happening in agriculture. It's, you know, it also means that who are the people left out of the equation, you know, and who is not benefiting from the system the way it is. And so, yeah, I think we need to think about polycultural farms from a racial equity lens as well.
Interesting, because I've worked with Joanne on this proposal to convert native lands to organic farms, and so it, you know, along these lines, I wonder what incentives we might have to get organic farmers to convert conventional farms to organic farms, and, you know, and to diverse organic farms. Because, you know, exactly the things that Molly was talking about are the things that are driving that. I mean, besides the policies of the organic program, besides having that 3-year transition, there's the big question of how do you get access to land? And do you have any ideas about that side of it, Joanne?
Well, there's lots of, the last time I looked, this is maybe 3 years ago, there was 35 different programs in the US helping small farmers. And those programs, it was a mix of things, like everything from farming to how do you get a good lease when you're leasing land. So I think there are some resources out there, and I'm saying small farmers just because I think that's mainly who we're talking about needs the most help. And that, you know, that information, I'm not sure how much of it is in different languages, but should be. Here in California, we have a lot of Latinx people, and more and more we need to have things in Spanish for them. Yeah, but if farmers do have native ecosystems, they can farm them organically, meaning say they have a prairie, they could still graze that prairie. We just don't want to see that the prairie gets turned into corn and soybeans, for instance. Or they could still harvest maple syrup out of maple forests, and or harvest all kinds of different plants from native ecosystems. We just want to make sure that those ecosystems stay intact, and to do that, we need to make sure that the dominant and characteristic plant species are still present. But to get back to, the diversity, social diversity and equity, we try to encourage people of all ways of or ethnicities to work with us, and we have, I think, been successful with doing that. It doesn't matter, what color you are. People are, whatever color you are, you're delighted when you see a nestling in a nest box, and or you're excited that there's barn owl pellets. The barn owls spit out pellets when they are digesting their prey. They spit out the bones, and it's something that you see, that you can say, oh, they are eating those rodents. Yeah, I think it's land access could and should entail more assistance to Native Americans. We're working with a group. We have nest boxes on some land south of San Francisco where the Land Trust has recently started working with these Native Americans that historically that was their land, and they are going to transfer land ownership to them over time. And so there are some models out there, and we just need more.
Molly, you seem like you have things to say here.
Sure. Yeah. With regards to the transition point that you brought up earlier, Terry, I think that I've heard of a few really creative economic solutions. I was really impressed years ago when I heard that Cliff Bar actually saw the need for there to be a market created for the crops that were being farmed during those transition years before it was able to be certified organic, so that those farmers could enjoy at least a portion of the full premium that certified organic farmers get. Because I do know that is one of the big challenges, to go an entire 3 years to not have the typical tools in one's tool belt for fighting weeds and pest pressure with chemicals as one is used to, and then going cold turkey and, not getting that actual premium for 3 more years. So I imagine that there's other food companies and other people looking to do that. I guess one step is for people that are growing crops that would otherwise be GMO crops, for them to at least, be getting the non-GMO certification during those 3 years, because that wouldn't rely on waiting the 3-year time period like organic certification does. But I think it is just important to really look at those economic incentives for large scale crop growers who are interested in making the transition. And, all these things are going to happen, concurrently. It's not like we do that, but we don't need to look at land access. So with regards to land access, there's really awesome work. You may be familiar with a farm out of New York called Soulfire Farm, and they've been a real leader in the work to help eliminate racism in the food system and in farming in particular. and they have created a network, or they're part of a network and helping facilitate a network of farms that are making up a reparations map, so that farmers of color who are interested in either getting access to land or have already started a farming project can literally just put themselves on the map, and people who, you know, may not be in their social networks can still find out about what they're doing and help and reach out to see if there's a way they can support them. Because I just think that's an important thing to remember in when we're looking at justice and equity and diversity and inclusion, that if we are, you know, if you're a white leader in a space that where you look around and you see a lot of other white folks, it doesn't mean that people of color don't care about the very same issues. Is that often they may be working on, you know, things that are framed differently. You know, they might be working on similar issues, but just be talking about it differently. And also, like, I think it's important for us to start, for myself to start thinking, like, how can I show up at somebody else's farm, you know, that's led by a person of color, and just offer my support, rather than thinking like that there's a need to necessarily recruit people to join this movement. It's like, actually, there's a lot of amazing work already happening in communities of color, that we need to just look at, like, what resources we can share, what time we can share, how we can contribute in that way. Because again, I just think there's so much need there, and it's not that there's lack of interest, it's that there's often just lack of resources.
I've got to read this question. To both of you fantastic people, what is needed to replicate and ramp up what you're doing? The work you're doing is foundational change that is needed at this historic moment. Who wants to go first?
Well, we are asking ourselves the same question, and so we are thinking we are gearing up to partner with a lot more nonprofits, a lot more commodities, and because we're a small organization, but with a big vision, we need to partner, and that's always been our model, to help educate others that are working in agriculture and take our message further. So, for instance, here in California, the wine industry is big, and because there's so many people that go out to wineries, it's like a destination. The wineries have all gotten hip to using the word sustainable, but they're not all sustainable. And so it's a big opportunity to help them get there, to really use more ecological processes and have more integrity in what they're doing. Not to say that there aren't some with great integrity, but as an example. We're seeing this more and more, that small farmers have been leaning towards sustainable production for a long time, but the big growers now are using those words and hiring staff to implement sustainable practices, and we can help them really, move the needle so they are more sustainable. And as much as I farmed on a small farm, and I love small farmers, I don't think we are going to be able to change agriculture without working with those big growers and helping them to use better practices and integrate more people in their communities, and support more people with good wages and healthy farming, healthy farms to work in.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. I appreciate it. And I also appreciate the the phrase systemic change, because I think that's really what we're talking about here. Is it's not just a one point solution. There's so many different elements to this shift that we're all, advocating for and working towards. And I definitely echo Joanne's request for just partnership. How do we work in synergy with other people? And unfortunately, often in the nonprofit space and even at the local kind of agriculture space, people, start to think of each other as competitors rather than collaborators. And it's like, we are just getting such a tiny sliver of the pie as it is. And so it's like everybody wants to make sure they're getting that little portion of that tiny sliver of the pie. But I've been recently thinking about how do we set this movement up so that we're not all just, kind of raising money from fancy farm dinners and, like the fundraising game gets really old, honestly. And it can be fun. And we're very fortunate to be, have this beautiful farm that we can showcase to donors and supporters and really make the case in person. And it can be a really wonderful relationship building opportunity. And, in terms of where public dollars are already being directed when it comes to agriculture, I'm very interested in seeing policy change happen so that we're actually looking at how can dollars at the federal level, at the state level, actually be going towards real business opportunities for small scale, regeneratively organic farmers, and not just perpetuating the systems that are, lining the pockets of these multinational corporations. So I think that, yes, we need everybody and their mothers and their brothers and everybody to, vote with your fork to actually shop at local farmers markets, buy direct from
3 minutes left.
Thanks. We also need to be thinking about the policy solutions, and there's some really great organizations working on that, but even considering what sort of local policy or state level policy can really help your region make these kinds of shifts.
Okay, in the couple minutes we have left, I'll read in another question here. It seems there's a need to change much of the language. Chemical intensive is not conventional. It's only been around for 70 years or so. Do you think there might be a tipping point that we can envision? It's a short answer question.
I just call it chemical-based agriculture instead of conventional. I know that's such a common thing that people say, conventional ag, but we can just call it chemical intensive, like they pointed out.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. The tipping point, yeah, well, I guess the tipping point means you need so many people involved, and then everybody else kind of follows along. So that's the goal, to get to that tipping point.
I know we're right at time, or just about. So I just want to
I just lost you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation.